Hello everyone, this video is on Amazon Kinesis, and I've wanted to make this video for a really long time because Kinesis is such a powerful service, but it's very difficult to understand. And I think part of that reason is because within Kinesis, there's 4 other kind of sub-services that exist within it, all that do very specific things that can be used independently or in combination with one another. And to make matters a little bit worse, there's a lot of overlap between these different sub-services and other AWS services. So people, they look at Kinesis and they get really confused. Like, should I be using this? Should I be using a part of this? And kind of what is this thing used for relative to these other services that seemingly work well for what I'm trying to do? So that's the whole theme of this video. I don't really want to go too into detail about Kinesis, any of the specific services within it, but I wanted to give you a broad overview of what Kinesis is and the different services that exist under it and the types of use cases that you can solve by using Kinesis. So in terms of the agenda for this video or the outline for this video, just 3 sections. So first of all, we're going to start with just very broadly, where does Kinesis fit in? Like, what is the objective of this service and what category of services are we even talking about anyways? Then we're going to move on to the different Kinesis solutions. And like I said, there's 4 different ones. So there's data streams, the data Firehose, data analytics. Wow, AWS really loves the word data for Kinesis. And then there's video streams, which is kind of like the odd man out here. You can see just by the name alone that it doesn't really fit with the others. I'll get to that a little bit later. And then finally, we're going to wrap it up by doing a comparison of how Kinesis compares to some other popular AWS services that seem to have some overlap, such as SNS, SQS, and Eventbridge. So that is the outline for this video. So let's jump right into it and talk about where Kinesis fits in. So Kinesis actually stands in the analytics category of AWS alongside other services like Redshift and possibly even Athena as well. But that's only part of it. Kinesis is really used for data processing at scale, and typically not just regular batch data, but streaming data. And streaming is kind of very voluminous in nature. You can think of streaming data like maybe telemetry data coming from devices or mobile devices or vehicles. There's tons and tons of vast quantities of data coming in from these different sources all at once. And the purpose of Kinesis is to help you ingest that data and process all of that data in AWS in a durable, secure, and scalable way. So that's the general theme of Kinesis. And so in terms of who are the people that use Kinesis, so it's typically used by folks with data backgrounds. So data engineers. So if you're trying to set up some kind of data pipeline or doing some types of transformations on your data as you're receiving it and storing it for later use. You can also be data analysts that want to use Kinesis to perform analysis on your live stream of data as it's coming in real time. There's also applications to help you out with that within Kinesis. And then finally, it could also be used for big data developers. So folks that want to, maybe use Spark or these other big data languages and store this data or analyze it and then store it in other locations as well. I've also, even myself, I'm just a run-of-the-mill software engineer. I've also used Kinesis quite a bit, both in terms of kind of ETLing my data into longer term store for like my BI teams to use and my analytics teams to use. And I've also used it as part of my backend using data streams specifically. So it's very diverse and it has a lot of potential in a variety of different use cases. So that's kind of where Kinesis fits in, broadly speaking. Let's jump into now just a broad overview of the different sub-services within Kinesis so that you can understand kind of what it has to offer. Okay, so within Kinesis, there's a couple different sub-services. So the first one is data streams. Now, data streams are all about ingestion, and they have this concept of temporary storage as well. So like I was kind of speaking to in the beginning about this telemetry data, that's one use case, but there's a lot of different use cases where you may want to consume large quantities of data and store it somewhere in AWS. You can think of other ones like clickstream events on a website. So say, for example, like Amazon.com or Best Buy or whatever website you use. You can imagine the thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of users that are all using these websites all at once, all clicking things. And this is very valuable information to derive insight, both in terms of like machine learning and also just analytics on what people are interested in. So that's one potential use case. And another one is for log files, another very popular use case. So say you're in a service-oriented architecture, you have log files coming from a bunch of different systems and you want to kind of collate them and analyze them and deliver them to somewhere. Another perfect example for Kinesis data streams. And then another one could be, like I was saying before, so telemetry data. So maybe you have trucks in the field and you want to collect information on, how harsh they're braking, how harsh or how aggressively they're accelerating, different things that they're doing, no seatbelts, that kind of stuff. That's valuable information that can be used at scale as well. So that's what Kinesis Data Streams is all about. It's basically the ingestion layer for high volume data that you want to consume in the AWS cloud. And so the next question that you probably want to answer is, once it's in your stream, like, what do you want to do with it next? And the answer is you probably want to try and derive some kind of insight from it. And so with that, you can use Kinesis Data Streams in conjunction with Kinesis Data Analytics. And Data Analytics is a service that allows you to basically analyze and transform your data using a bunch of open source technologies that we'll talk a little bit later. So stuff like joining your data, waiting for late arriving events, doing time window analysis live in real time on your data as it exists in your stream at a particular moment. Or you can use it to kind of do this analysis and then enrich your data in these different ways and then deliver it to somewhere else. So that's how data analytics can be used as well. And for those of you that are wondering, it uses Apache Flink, and we'll talk a little bit about that more later on. And then once you analyze and enrich your data, your next question or your next task in this equation is to put that data somewhere, right? And so that's where Kinesis Data Firehose comes in. And Data Firehose is all about, it's got a couple different roles. You'll see that there's some overlap with data streams, but it can ingest data on its own, or you can use it in conjunction with data streams. More on that later. And you can use it to do things like simple transformations of your data. So maybe compress it, decompress it, group it, filter it, those kinds of things. As data is coming into your Firehose stream, you can do these transformations on it. And then once you get a certain number of records, you can deliver them out to the destinations. That's why it's called a stream. You have all this data coming in. It's being funneled into one specific spot and then spit out the other side. And then finally, you can do, of course, delivery. So delivering that data to the variety of AWS services. The great part about using Firehose is that it has native integration with very popular AWS services like S3 and Redshift, and more on that a little bit later as well. And so these are the three main services. And of course, I did mention that there is a fourth, and it's Kinesis Video Streams. And again, this is kind of the odd man out because it doesn't really fit into this whole story of data processing. And it's in the name as well. It's all about video processing. And so this is, like I said, for video processing. So maybe you have a use case where you have real-time camera data coming in and you're doing image detection on some live feed. You can do that kind of thing with video processing. But I do think that video processing and video streams is kind of a niche use case. It's not generally what people use when they're using Kinesis. And for that reason, we're not really going to be talking about video streams past this point. We're mostly going to be talking about these three guys here, data streams, data analytics, and data firehose, just because they're the most commonly used and I think can give most folks the most value. So that's a high-level overview of those three services and the group of services available under Kinesis. Now what I want to do is dive into each one of these and understand a little bit about them independently and how they can be used kind of either on their own or in concert with the other services if you choose to do so. So first, let's talk about Kinesis data streams, and we're going to stick with this example of clickstream events. Imagining we have a world where, say we're operating Amazon.com, for example, and we have hundreds of millions of users browsing, clicking things on our website. We want to consume all of that data and get hold of it because it's valuable. Data is gold, as they say, and we want to retrieve it or hold it, and we want to put it somewhere. So for that, we can use Kinesis data streams. Now, the first question is, folks are using your website, they're clicking things, they're doing stuff, they're hovering, scrolling, yada, yada, yada. How do I get that information into my data stream? And so there's a couple different options that are at your disposal example, the first one is to use API Gateway with a service proxy so that you can directly integrate into your data stream. And with this format, you don't need any credentials or secret keys to be stored on your client. Assuming you have some kind of authentication layer on your front end, you can directly write to your API Gateway endpoint and that data will get delivered into your data stream. And so that's one feasible option. If you have a more secure producer of your information, so say it's a backend that you can control, you don't have to do it this way. You can use the Kinesis producer library to directly write into Kinesis data stream. So that's one option. I have just the single option here in front of you with API Gateway, but there's different ways to do the same task here, like I always say. Okay, so once your data is inside of your Kinesis data stream, then it's time to deliver it to the different destinations, right? Or to process it from these different destinations. And so for every record that gets put into your data stream, you can have multiple different consumers that are all interested in consuming that information. And so say, for example, you have one consumer that cares about, bot detection. It's interested in analyzing the clickstream movements of users, seeing how they react to CAPTCHAs, and they're just pulling information off of your stream constantly and analyzing it in real time, trying to determine who's a bot and who's not. And for that, you can use EC2 with the Kinesis consumption library. It makes it very easy to consume the data off of your Kinesis stream. It's provided by the AWS SDK. It's not as easy as using something like an AWS Lambda to consume information, but it is possible if you want to go down that route. Now, another consumer may be like an A/B testing service, maybe something that's doing experiments by like changing the color of a button and seeing how people react, or changing the shape or the text of how people see items. This is another valuable kind of tool to have here, and they'd be interested in this clickstream data as well. So you have another service that's also pulling data off the stream. And then finally, you can have some kind of customer profiling service that's all about trying to bucketize users into these different groups to derive, if you're in this group, then you're most likely to be interested in buying X. And so let's show you more of X. So that's another use case for this. But again, it's all about consuming this vast quantity of data independently from one another. That's the interesting thing here. Each of these different consumers are consuming the data in the stream at their own rates, at their own speed. So certain consumers can go really, really fast. Certain consumers, if they're fine with it, can go slower. It's all up to them. Now, just a couple extra details here. So this data stream concept, you can kind of think of it as a timeline. And I'm just going to draw on here a little bit just because I didn't have an image prepared. And so it's kind of like a timeline, and the range of data. So by default, you have 24 hours worth of data in your stream. So 24, I'm sorry, my writing is horrendous here, but I really wanted to illustrate this concept. So as consumers are kind of putting data into your stream, it's always on a rolling window of 24 hours. So typically we put records into the stream. So like say there's records that are being put into this stream constantly, and say like right here is now. Now by default, the different consumers that are all pulling off of this stream have a pointer to which record they are on, and that's what enables them to consume at their own rate. So the bot detection service, if it's going really slow, it may be here, right? And so it still has this many records to consume. If A/B testing service and customer profiling service, they're using Lambdas, maybe they're a lot quicker. They're constantly at the tip of the stream. So they're consuming at this rate. And so the neat thing about this is that the data that exists in this stream is durable. It's there, it exists. It's kind of like a database, but not really. It shouldn't be used as a database, but you can think of it as a persistent store. And so what that also means is that, say there's an error in the customer profiling service, like, oh damn, we did a bad deployment, and for the last 12 hours, we've been making mistakes in the way that we're determining the profile of users. What they can do is roll back their pointer to a previous point in time, and then effectively replay all of this data from this point forward, all the way to the future. Now, that's a really, really powerful feature. The fact that you can replay data independently at the consumer level, extremely, extremely powerful. And to make that even better, this time window, 24 hours, is, this is the default, but it's configurable. It can be up to 365 days or 1 year of data that persist in your data stream over time. Now, of course, that's going to cost you a heck of a lot of money to maintain, especially if it's a really chatty application like one that consumes clickstream events, but very powerful, and it's there if you need it. And this is really the main feature of data streams and Kinesis in general. This is what makes Kinesis powerful. The fact that you have this durable data store that can be effectively reset by the consumers at any point and consume the data very, very rapidly as well in an efficient and reliable way. This is where it's at with data streams. So now let's move on to talking about one of the other services. So now we're going to talk about Data Firehose. And I did skip the order or change the order a little bit. I want to talk about Firehose before analytics, and the reason will make sense in a moment once we get into it. So we're going to use that same example, clickstream events coming in through API Gateway into your Kinesis data stream. And so with Firehose, like we kind of learned before, Firehose is all about data ingestion and transformation. And so it's not necessarily ingesting data directly from the producer. There's two options in the way that you can use Firehose. So you can use Firehose in conjunction with Kinesis data stream. So this is the first option here. You can hook up your Firehose, your Kinesis Firehose to your data stream so that as data gets ingested into your data stream, it automatically gets delivered to your Firehose, where you can take advantage of things like transformations and batching, which I'll get into in a moment. However, you don't have to use these two things together all the time. If you have no use of using data streams, then you can just use Kinesis Firehose. So you can have this kind of option here, where you're putting data from your API directly into Firehose itself in absence of a stream. And this is a more cost-effective option as well. And the same things kind of hold true like I was speaking of before, like you don't have to go through the API, you can go around this way as well. The same kind of concept still applies here. And so once you have your data in your Kinesis Data Firehose, I haven't really talked about the advantage of it yet, but I will in a second. One of the other big things about using Firehose is your ability to deliver your data to multiple different destinations, different destination types, depending on what you're trying to do. So what are those different delivery destinations? So the most common one by far is Amazon S3 or simple storage service to just store your raw files. You can put it in Glacier for long-term storage. The great thing about using S3 is that it's very versatile. So it's easy to copy it to another location afterwards. Once it's in S3, that's a big reason why most people go with S3 in general. Another destination that you can use is Amazon Redshift, and this is more for like BI analytics purposes, a wide columnar database. And then there's also OpenSearch, Amazon OpenSearch, aka Elasticsearch, which is more so used for like text analysis, text sentiment, and like search engines and stuff like that. Now you will notice that I only have an arrow going to one of these, and it's not going to all these different ones. And that's kind of one little quirk with Firehose. You can only have one destination. You can't have like one Firehose stream putting to multiple different ones. You'd have to set up, a different Firehose stream for each delivery destination. And that's why it's good to go with S3 because, like I said, you can copy it to other ones independently if you want. Okay, so far we just talked about Firehose as this abstract thing that consumes data and puts it to these delivery destinations. You may be asking yourself, like, why can't I just use data streams to deliver to my destinations? Totally valid question. The difference or the key is that Firehose gives you a lot more functions as well that you can take advantage of. And the biggest one is batching. So far we've been talking about live streaming data coming in from over here from your clickstream events, right? It's going into, it doesn't matter if it's coming in through Kinesis or Firehose, but it's live streaming data. And it wouldn't necessarily make sense to, go through this flow and then, for every one click over here on your clickstream to do a put object for just one record, right? Same thing with Redshift, same thing with OpenSearch. That's not an effective use of your resources. You'd probably want to group your records here into a fixed size and then do like a batch put request or a batch put into Redshift, something like that. And so that is a feature that Firehose supports, this concept of batching. So as your data is getting ingested through either of these two flows, you can configure it to batch your independent records into larger chunks. And there's a really powerful way that allows you to do it. And so you have two options when you're using batching. You can either do time-based, so when it hits a certain time threshold, so after 5 minutes, just dump whatever I've gotten so far into my destination. And then you can also do it based on the payload size. So say for instance, if you accrue in your Kinesis data Firehose a certain amount of data, let's say 5 megabytes, then automatically deliver that to my destination. And so let's take an example where you have maybe 60 seconds. Let me draw this out here because I didn't kind of have anything. So let's say you have 60 seconds and 5 megabytes worth of data that's how you set up your batching logic. So what that means is that as data is coming into your Firehose here, if you get, within this 1 minute, this is between 0 and 60, if you get, a couple records, 3 records here that go in by the time the 60 seconds is hit, then it's going to take these 3 records, and then deliver them to your destination, right? However, if, say for instance, you have a different use case where again, it's 0 and 60, but you have a lot of records coming in all at once, tons and tons of records within the first couple seconds, right? Instead of waiting for the 60 minutes to expire, it'll wait for 5 megabytes worth of data, whatever you have here, do the cutoff there, take these records and then deliver them up into your destination. And then the timer will effectively reset. So what this effectively means is that Firehose is elastic. It can scale dynamically based on the volume of data that's coming in and batch it into chunks, either based on payload size or based on time frame. And you can do like much longer time frames as well. I think like up 5 minutes or so. I know that guaranteed, but it's probably a lot higher. And I think the maximum here for payload size is 128. Excuse me, that's an 8 megabytes. Anyways, so that is a little bit about Firehose in terms of how batching works. Let me just get rid of this diagram here so I don't confuse anyone. Now, another important attribute or important capability of using Firehose as well is the ability to transform your data. And so you can use transformers on the inbound stem into your Firehose stream. And so what I mean by that is like inbound in terms of when it's coming either from Kinesis into your Firehose or directly through the direct put endpoint. You can basically have a Lambda function sit in between that can grab that record, do some kind of transformation on it, and then put it into your Firehose. So things like data filtering, things like data encoding, things like stripping out PII data, or things like, compression or enrichment. Say you want to call another service for this record to match it, in our case, in our clickstream case. Say you want to add some extra data to the clickstream event, like the order or the customer ID rather, and the customer attribute. You can use these transformers to go and call that service out over here, enrich that data, then put it into your Firehose. And then you can store all of that in your delivery destination. And so this is another really powerful feature of using Firehose. Allows you to transform, batch, and deliver your data to these variety of delivery destinations. Okay, so that's it for Firehose. And just to briefly recap, I wanted to emphasize that you can either use Firehose alone without any other service, besides the delivery destinations, or in conjunction with data streams. So you can use them together as well. But that's one thing to keep in mind. I wanted to make that clear because a lot of people get confused on when should I use what and how should I use this kind of thing. Anyways, let's move on now to talk about the third category, which is data analytics. And so this feature, using data analytics, is one that needs to be used in conjunction with data streams. You don't have that option like we just discussed. It works in tandem with data streams. And so the data analytics framework that you have access to when you use it is called Apache Flink. And Apache Flink is a really popular streaming framework for big data processing. It's resilient, it's robust, it's scalable. You can handle hundreds of thousands, if not millions of records in very high concurrency. And you can also do some pretty insane things in terms of analytics. And it's really, really flexible as well. I've used it personally. I have to say, very, very impressed with it. So some of the different use cases or some of the different things you can do with it in terms of performing additional analysis on your live streaming data You can do things like doing dynamic data joins. So say, for example, you have an event occurs, and in order to process the event, two other events that are related to that event also need to happen. And if one of those sub-events come in, you don't want to process it just yet. You want to wait for that second event to come in and then process them as a pair. So doing these types of data joins where you delay your processing for a period of time until the counterpart event comes in, a really powerful feature of using Apache Flink and data analytics, of course. The other one that I briefly talked about earlier was time window analysis. Very, very powerful and useful. So you can do things like fixed window time analysis. So for example, every 5 minutes, I want to see what my top leaderboards are, or something like that, if you're in a video game. Or in our world, in our clickstream world, who are the top orders, which countries or which customers. You can also do tumbling windows, so 5-minute intervals, but they start on every minute. They're not at a fixed start time. Also very powerful, so you can get rolling windows there. And you can also do that dynamically as well, so set different time frames based on the characteristics of your data. So super, super wacky things that you can do here, and very powerful to derive this extra insight out of your data as it's coming through your stream in real time. Super, super cool. The last one that is very powerful that I've personally dealt with is dealing with late arriving data. So often when you're processing events from consumers, data sometimes comes late. Maybe someone clicked on something on your website, and just as they clicked it, they shut the lid of their laptop, and that event didn't get lost. It's going to be sent when the laptop gets turned on again, but it's just late arriving. So Flink also supports this concept of kind of synthetic times, or they call them watermarks. So you can more easily deal with late arriving data and deal with it in an elegant way, not just drop events that are old just because, oh, this thing is 6 days old, it can't be real. No, often you want to capture those events as well and deal with them accordingly. So using this data analytics framework in conjunction with data streams, you can analyze all this data, right? And the reason that I wanted to talk about Firehose after analytics is because of this, because of after you perform your analytics, you do want to deliver those analytics results somewhere, maybe in the form of enriched data, join data, time window analyzed data, all that kind of stuff. And there you use a feature called sinks, which are basically destinations in Flink terminology. And your sink can be a Kinesis data firehose. And as we learned, Kinesis data firehose can also batch data, and it could also deliver data to all of these different destinations. By the way, I think I forgot Splunk on the different destinations for Firehose. Also something to keep in mind. But this is why the combination of these services is so powerful. And if we look at this whole thing in big picture format, you have your data source coming here on the side, and then you have your kind of ingestion piece through API Gateway and Kinesis data streams. You have your analytics going on in the center to enrich your data and kind of derive more meaning from it. Then you have this Firehose stream, which is consuming the data in order to deliver it to these final destinations for further analysis. So that is the big picture of how all these different services fit together. And so hopefully at this point, you have a good understanding of data streams, analytics, and Firehose at a kind of primitive level. But I also wanted to talk about briefly how these different services are compared to some other popular AWS services, ones that have some overlap with the types of problems that we talked about, and when you should use Kinesis or any one of these umbrella services of Kinesis or these other AWS services. And so the ones people get confused about a lot, well, there's three of them. There's Amazon Simple Notification Service, or SNS. There is Simple Queue Service, or SQS. And then there is Amazon Eventbridge. So I just wanted to tackle these one by one. And let's just start with SNS over here, Simple Notification Service. So Simple Notification Service is typically used as an event coordinator with distributed applications looking for a pub sub. So publisher subscriber type arrangement. So publishers are people that own like a data model or a concept for a service. And they, whenever an event happens, like someone places an order, for example, they want to publish that event so that other consumers can consume it or get notified that that event occurred. And obviously, as you can tell, there's a little bit of overlap here, like, publishing events, consuming data. That sounds a lot like what we talked about with Kinesis data streams, right? Like the ability to consume data. Now, the main difference is that, like we learned with Kinesis data streams, we have this timeline concept, right? Where data exists in this timeline over time, and these consumers can consume it independently. SNS does not have this concept at all. As consumers publish messages into SNS, it's delivered to the different consumers. So it is pushed to these different consumers. And there's no state within your SNS topic. Topic is the vernacular we use. So you can't say like, okay, roll back to a moment in the past. Once a message is put into the SNS topic, SNS will try and deliver that message to the subscriber for a predetermined period of time. And if it cannot deliver that, it'll either go into a dead letter queue, which is just a temporary failure storage area, or it will just drop the message. So less durability here and less recovery or ability to recover from failure, but more so this type of architecture, this service itself is used for kind of that pub sub, so event orchestration workflows. Okay, so that's SNS. Let's talk about SQS. And SQS also has a very different purpose. SQS is for a distributed queue. So say you want to process different information, you want to put that information or different messages into a queue. And so different messages can sit in this queue over time. And you have another service that's interested in processing this queue, typically the owner of it, and they will just take this queue as it exists and pull messages off of it and process them one by one. Again, similar to what we had with Kinesis data streams, there's no concept of this timeline. So once the message is pulled off, these messages get deleted. You can't roll back, you can't reprocess, you can't do anything like that. So that's how SQS is different. And then Eventbridge, this one is kind of not it's similar to SQS and SNS, probably more so to SNS than SQS. But anyways, you use this concept of an event bridge. And so your event bridge is kind of like a pipe. So you have different events that are flowing through your pipe. And then you have different consumers over here that are only interested in certain subtypes. So say like this top row is one subtype. So this guy is only interested in these ones. This guy is only interested in these ones. So it'll go there. So you basically have this filtering mechanism built into your Eventbridge event bus, and you can deliver messages to specific clients that are interested in either different data types or attributes on the data itself. So another way to consume, but again, doesn't provide these features like we talked about here, this timeline. So no rollbacks, no anything like that. So that's really it for the video. So I hope you learned a lot about Kinesis. If you're interested in any of these different services, SNS, SQS, Eventbridge, or Kinesis Data Firehose, or setting that up, I have videos on all of these topics. So check out the videos on my channel if you like this. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.